Hey, I hope you guys are as warm inside today as I am and enjoying this snow day. I figured it'd be a good chance to record this midterm review video for you. Remember, the slide presentation is available without this video also in your midterm review folder. Let's get rid of this guy. Okay, so I'm going to be going over most of the terms necessary for the exam, but that doesn't mean I will cover absolutely everything. Everything is fair game, chapter 1 through chapter 8. Okay, so chapter 1 was psychology's histories and approaches. This is a lot of names and, the basis of psychology. You definitely want to know Wilhelm Wundt. He is super important. I bet you he's going to be on the AP exam. I can guarantee you he's on the midterm. He's known as the father of experimental psychology, and we know him because he set up the first psychology laboratory. Remember, he was interested in dropping the balls and seeing how quickly people were able to hit the button. We also want to be aware of the term introspection. This is one of the questions in the card games. A lot of people are getting right, fortunately. So this is the self-reflection, observation of one's own sensations and feelings. It was discredited because it's really hard to scientifically prove what's going on inside of somebody's, own internal sensations and feelings versus somebody else. We want to know that this is part of the very first school of thought known as structuralism, and this is what used introspection as one of its tools. This was introduced by Wundt's student Titchener, so we want to know Titchener as well. And basically, it's just studying each of the structural elements of the mind separately, how they all exist, the structure of them. But it was like trying to understand a car by examining its parts, so it's definitely criticized because it didn't do a great enough job of looking at ourselves as a whole entity. So William James, we know in 1890, he published the first psychology textbook, and he's known for the functionalism school of psychology, and this looks at our internal systems as systems, not just separate parts, and he says that behavior patterns are learned and maintained because they are successful. So our body and our mind continue to do these things. It focuses on our mental and behavioral processes, function, how they enable us to adapt, survive, and flourish, and just become better. We also need to know Watson for sure. He should be the first thing that comes to mind when you think of behaviorism. Little Albert study that you read about in chapter 6, that was Watson. No, Watson. You should all know Sigmund Freud is the father of psychoanalysis. He's largely discredited, but we still want to know his name, his contributions. A big thing we'll be talking about too in chapter 10, I want to say, is this idea of repression, and we're going to talk about personality as well. You definitely know the different perspectives of psychology that carry on throughout all of our chapters, all of our units. So humanistic perspective, this is about becoming the best person you can be. Think Maslow, think Rogers. They look at the healthy humans and how can we get them to be the best humans they can be. And the goal is to seek self-actualization. The psychodynamic perspective, we know that is fathered by Sigmund Freud, and our behavior comes from our unconscious drive. So whenever you think of Freud and psychoanalysis, you have to think of unconsciousness. And he also says a lot of our issues stem from our childhood. Behaviorism, I just mentioned that, but remember, behaviors is all about observable behavior. They don't care about what's going on in your mind or your unconscious mind like Freud. They care about what is going on, what can you observe, and that comes back a lot, we know, in chapter 6 when we talked about learning. Sociocultural perspective focuses on how culture affects your behavior, how your behavior living here may be different than if you lived in China, than if you lived in Australia, than if you lived in the middle of nowhere, how your behavior, how your psychology would be different. Remember, clinical psychology, this is probably what most of you think of when you think of psychologists. You're focusing on the diagnosis and treatment of people with psychological disorders. That could be bipolar disorder, that could be, narcolepsy, that could be social identity disorder, that could be anorexia, whatever. It covers a broad spectrum, anxiety, depression, that kind of thing. Okay, chapter 2 is research methods. You definitely want to be aware of research methods, not just the terms, but understanding how experimentation works. So replication was a term that was also in our card game. A lot of us got it right. That's just repeating an earlier study. We want experiments to be repeated to make sure that the results are reliable. And it's not just one guy doing a study and trying to prove his results and saying that they're the end-all, be-all. The empirical approach is basing decisions or conclusions on observable evidence, stuff we can definitely see. So behaviors like this. Hindsight bias, that's the tendency to believe after learning the outcome that you knew it all along. So like looking back and saying, look, I knew that was going to happen. Okay, a case study. We know this is where you can only study one person or situations in depth. So think of Phineas Gage. Remember, he was the guy who got the pole through the head. He is a case study because we can't go around, shoving poles through people's heads and replicating that study at all. Naturalistic observation is this is when you're just focusing things in their natural environment. This is not in a lab. This is if I went to the cafeteria and started recording what the behaviors you guys were partaking in. Okay, correlational research. Correlational research, correlation does not equal causation, right? So it detects a relationship between two variables. It does not say that one causes the other. If we see something as a positive correlation, remember a perfect positive correlation has a R value of +1. This means the variables go in the same direction. So as drug use goes up, more of a negative correlation. So as studying goes up, grades go up. As studying goes down, grades go down. That's a positive correlation because both variables are moving in both directions. A negative correlation and a perfect negative correlation would have an R value of -1. It means the variables go in opposite directions. So as drug use goes up, grades go down. As drug use goes down, grades go up. Again, one does not cause the other, but they have a relationship. A double-blind procedure, this is kind of the best way to run an experiment because participants don't know who is in the control or experimental group, and then also the researchers don't know who is in the control or experimental group. Okay, how to read a correlation coefficient. This is super, super important. I just mentioned R value, right? That's how a correlation coefficient is represented. In this case, we'll look at this, it's a 0.37. Since we know our R values can only be between -1, which means a perfect negative correlation, to +1, that's a perfect positive correlation, we can only get numbers in between. 0 means there is just no correlation at all. The variables are not correlated. The closer you get to the extremes of -1 and 1, that means the stronger the relationship of that correlation coefficient. That means the stronger correlation between those two variables that you have identified. Okay, other stuff you want to know, math-related stuff from Chapter 2. We know mean. We know that's the average, right? You take a set of data, add it all together, then divide it by your number of points of data. That's your average. Median is when you line up all the numbers in a row, all your data points, whatever number falls in between is your median. Mode is the number that occurs most frequently. Your range is the difference between the highest and lowest numbers in a set of data. When we talk about range, that's a measure of variation or variance. When we talk about mean, median, mode, that's a measure of central tendency. So that where you're looking at the center of data, range is looking at the differences between the data, as is standard deviation, showing the variance of scores around the mean. Researchers want a small standard deviation because that means the data points are closer together. Okay. Independent variable, again, super crucial. I have some application questions on our midterm. The independent variable is whatever researchers are manipulating in the experiment, and they're hoping that some kind of change in the independent variable will bring about change in the dependent variable. If there's a drug in the experiment, the drug is 99.9999% of the time is the independent variable because that's what you're changing to see the result in a study. Dependent variable is then the effect of the drug that you have taken. It's whatever's being measured in the experiment, okay? And it is dependent on the independent variable. Okay, I'm going to stop here, and then I'm going to record the next video right after this.